Well, obviously, one of the critical issues for the entire globe is the ongoing genocide in Gaza. There's a lot of questions about how that may or may not affect the presidential election here in the United States. And we are very, very honored to be joined here by Dr. Hassan Abdel Salam, who is the director of the Abandon Harris campaign. Dr. Salam, thanks so much for being with us.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for all your work.
Well, listen, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I guess I'll just start with this. I mean, last week we saw the DNC with, the just total snub of the Palestinian people and anyone who cares about this issue of the genocide. I'm curious, you all abandoned Harris, you were there, you had a press conference, you were pushing different things. I mean, what has been the response you have seen to your call to deliver a vote against those perpetuating genocide in the wake of what we saw in the DNC?
Among communities of conscience, it's very clear that the sense is of elation, relief, that there's at least a voice and opportunity for all of us to take action at this critical moment where our country is engaging in one of the most vicious human rights violation in our history, the genocide, enabling it, this administration, and the bombings, the munitions that are raining upon people in Gaza. And so when we came out and we said very clearly that the only thing that we have now in our arsenal, our nonviolent arsenal, is to punish the vice president for enabling genocide in order for us to buy power such that it will be forever known that people of conscience came out, they walked gently to the ballot box, and they spoke the truth, and it led to the demise, the toppling of genocide. This administration should be known for what it is. It is despicable for us to even have this very conversation today, for us to contemplate the options in a democratic election for which this should never have been a choice. And so we feel committed, as we have begun with Mr. Biden in October. We declared that he would be someone we would never support. We actively began campaigning against him since November 1st when he didn't declare a permanent ceasefire. In July, we made a similar request to the vice president. We asked her to tell us what her policies were. We only wanted two: an unconditional ceasefire, permanent, and second, a full arms embargo. The media took our message to the campaign. They said, no, we're not going to talk to you. And so extraordinary, the reaction that you could see after that, the vice president speaking to protesters who were screaming the song of justice, saying, you will never hide from genocide. And she said, I'm speaking. And we knew there and then we had no other option but to punish. And that's why on August 19th, we did so in Chicago, blocks away from the DNC convention. Because the real question, Madam Vice President, is when will the people of Gaza speak? When will people of conscience oppressed all around the world because of us? Their voices are completely silenced. When you had a moment to hear from young people, them talking on behalf of the voiceless, you shut them down because you felt that you had to continue with your speech that day. But for day after day, attack after attack, silence from this administration. Silence in the face of people who are shouting and dying to be heard. And so even if we're the only ones, and our people understand that that might be the case, the only movement, the only organization that abandons Harris, we will do it regardless of consequence. And we will win, and we will defeat this administration, because in the swing states, we believe we can actually ensure that this vice president doesn't win because of these vile attacks on an innocent people on the verge of disintegration.
Hassan, I'm curious if you could maybe explain to our audience or differentiate a bit, because I think it's a little bit confusing. And obviously there was some overlap between the Uncommitted movement and what was initially the Abandon Biden movement that's now the Abandon Harris movement. But now that overlap, I guess, is kind of over. after what happened at the Democratic Convention, or maybe even before that. So can you explain to our audience what is the difference between the uncommitted movement and then the idea of abandon Harris?
So the critical difference that I would say between both is that we believe our leverage comes from punishing, ensuring the defeat of those who have violated the rights, the civil rights of innocent people. Whereas Uncommitted believes in the continued negotiation, reconciliation with those in power. We've made it clear from the beginning, and that has been a difference that we've seen from October, from November. Even though we called on people to vote uncommitted in the primary, Abandon Biden called on people to vote uncommitted, we are not uncommitted in the sense that we believe very essential that the message to the political landscape will only come if there is a defeat on November 5th. Whereas folks in the uncommitted campaign, they believe that they could still leverage some type of concession from the Democratic Party, from the vice president, by continued interaction, engagement with the party. We were never welcome to the DNC. We don't get any donations from the Democratic Party. We're often attacked by the Democratic Party. We take a stance that we cannot in any way legitimize this party that's engaged in genocide. As a human rights professor, I could tell you that we feel that engagement with the party, seeking concessions after it's been evident that they don't want to provide any support to the people of Gaza, would be a road folly in its pursuit, because it would mean that if they were to win this election, they would have won despite the genocide. So what would happen afterwards if they're rewarded? Our parents and family and friends who are killed would be a precedent that could be set, and any oppression you can engage in with communities of conscience and still then say, you still have to vote for us. And so we feel very strongly, though we love the people in Uncommitted, we know they're well-intentioned, we know that they are seeking the good of Gaza, we feel that the only way that we can win in this fight is if history writes that the Democratic Party at the presidential level lost, was defeated, was punished because of their unconscionable attacks on an innocent people.
No, I think, that it's a very important point, and I'm glad you raised the issue of people of conscience. And for those who saw your press conference, they won't be surprised. But I wanted you to just opine a little bit on, the diversity of Abandon Harris, because I think some people are trying to pigeonhole this as this is just a Muslim thing, this is just an Arab thing, which obviously a lot of Arab and Muslim people are speaking out. But there was a poll in March that 1 in 6 black voters were considering not voting as a form of protest, and that protecting Palestine was one of the top issues that was causing them to say that. So this is something that transcends, any one community in terms of those who want to deliver a message like what Abandon Harris is promoting.
People from all backgrounds, African American, Latino, Gen Z, people from all ages, religions, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, are part of the Abandon Biden and now Abandon Harris movement. We see and are guided by the light of Martin Luther King. We're here to say that this is an American movement that has people from all across the nation. It resonates. People don't want to side or be complicit with genocide. Our fathers and foremothers, the people who set the course for civil rights, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, John Lewis, they guide us and remind us that civil rights belong to all people, not just Americans. And so torture, genocide, displacement should not happen to anyone around the world. We are gratified by the attention by folks in our press conferences, in our protests, coming from all backgrounds. At our very press conference, we had Cornel West, we had Jill Stein, we had Claudia de la Cruz, and we believe that this mission is one that all Americans must participate in. Muslim Americans and Arab Americans are but a minority, and we have been inspired and want to be hand in hand with all people of conscience, and that anyone can participate. Libertarians, former Republicans, former Democrats, progressives, conservatives. We are not talking about a political policy, a question, an issue that differentiates Americans. We're talking genocide. This should be attracting 100% of our population from all across the nation. And so I'm here to tell you, please join us. Please come and teach us. Please hold our hands so we can, like people before us, sing the song that we shall overcome.
I want to ask you because, this is a question that I'm sure you get often, because this is pretty much the line of defense when it comes to how Democrats respond to the idea of how, not voting for Kamala Harris, is how do you respond to the whole, well, you're basically getting Trump elected by doing this, which I think is a really insidious attack line, but nonetheless, it's one that we hear a lot. So how do you respond to that line of you are helping get Trump elected, and as a result, things are just going to turn out worse for Palestinians than they already are?
And the former president prevented our family and friends and colleagues from entering America, but the vice president killed them. Madam Vice President, you killed our people. You killed human beings. If it were the case that you committed some act that we could actually negotiate with, for example, you didn't pursue a specific policy that we have disagreements about on taxes or on some policy question about the degree and relative importance of infrastructure in particular states, well, those are technicalities. We could differ. But when you come to the value of life, this is a message to all Americans. There is no compromise. There's things we should never compromise on because otherwise we're all unsafe. We need to have a nation and a planet that's safe. And so what we say is when you commit genocide, our only option is to send a clear signal that it's intolerable. And so the president and now the former president that you refer to, out abandoned Biden and now abandoned Harris, we say 4 years under any Republican is incomparable to 1 day in Gaza. That we understand fully that this struggle continues, but that we must, in our first step, punish genocide here on November 5th, and then continue with our fellow Americans all across the planet and here in the United States in the struggle against Trump. We believe all these, the two candidates at the top of the ticket here, Mr. Trump and the vice president, who really represent a single ticket, are despicable candidates. An oligopoly, a bargain, that when people say you'll bring the other, curious how they say that. They seem to describe the reality of a difference without a distinction when it comes to genocide. We will fight them all, and our first step is those who began the genocide for us to send a clear signal. And maybe I should share a personal story. I was imprisoned and tortured in Jerusalem when doing research on the occupation with youth. And in prison, I still recall the feeling of utter loneliness, the clanking through the two metallic doors, my heart rate increasing, not knowing what will happen, the interrogation, why did you come here? Because we put a message on YouTube in Arabic calling for the liberation of Palestine. And we had all these youth, and they would tell us, Amran here, one of the youth with us, is behind these doors, and Sheikh Sami is behind these doors to humiliate me. One person said that they put bleach on themselves every night because they talk to scum like me. I was utterly destroyed internally. And all I wanted was for people to speak for me. I dreamed a dream that in America, people were calling for my release. And when I finally came back, my second trauma, unparalleled, the trauma of loneliness. No one knew about my story. The American government didn't try to seek my release. And so what we are doing here, if history writes that this happened, that people of conscience, despite the sacrifice of only 4 years, where we survived the former president, but that we came out for a people innocent who will suffer bombings that will continue after the election of the vice president. That we came out and ensured that she was defeated, and it will be written that was because of the genocide, and that people did it in spite of the fact that they knew and they hated the other option. So this is a moment of glory and courage, a moment, a destiny, November 5th, for all of history, for people to know that even when it came to sacrificing, Trump is a sacrifice, no doubt, a despicable candidate, a man who will rule with impunity, but with constraints within America because of our Supreme Court and our Congress. He will never bomb us and maim us and destroy us in the way that Netanyahu, with the support of the vice president, is doing currently in Gaza and now today in the last few days in the West Bank. The genocide is spreading because people believe around the world that they can get away with it. And so, my fellow Americans, do not be deceived by the rhetoric, the doublespeak that tells you there's a lesser evil when it comes to genocide. And go out for the people who are voiceless. When I was in prison in this mock justice, I met one of the youth as they were taking me to the courts behind bars, handcuffed on my hands, my feet as they processed me. And he asked me a question. He said, "What would I do if I would go back to America?" And I quickly said I'd speak out, even though the interrogators kept saying, "I'll stay here forever." And the most amazing thing appeared on his face, a huge, brilliant smile. Despite being tortured, early 20s, married, worried about his family, what brought him pleasure is that right now everyone here would hear his story. That all he wanted was not the bombs to end, or for people to learn now finally that the occupation has come to an end, which it must. But rather, his smile came because people of conscience were telling his story and acting. And the greatest action you can do that has implications is to vote. Vote against genocide.
Well, we thank you so much, Dr. Hassan Abdel Salam, director of the Abandon Harris campaign. It was our honor to have you here with us. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time.
Pleasure. Take good care.